My feeling about Lou as an artist, as a writer and as a songwriter, is sort of mixed. I feel that he's very, he's extremely clever with words. He's brilliant in that he, in the same way that Dylan can find the right word. He can put them together so that they 9 times out of 10 they scan beautifully and they work together. But I think for me it's more that he's clever with the words. But I think his real genius is his melodies. So as a songwriter, his words are catchy and they get your attention and they work within the songs. But I think what really makes his songs timeless is the melodies that he puts together for them. I know there are some lyrics that he wrote that are where he may have gotten a cul-de-sac and couldn't get out, so he just kind of put words together that sounded good, and it's almost like the sound becomes more important than what the content is. But again, his brilliance with melody for me is really his genius. When I sang Candy Says, we'd only been playing the song for a little while, and I didn't know what was, really what the song's about or the history involved in it. And at some point when Lou and I were on the outs, he kind of made fun of me for that, for not knowing what it was when I was singing it. And certainly had I known, I probably wouldn't have sung it because it wouldn't have been relevant. And I think part of the reason that it worked was because for me it meant something totally different. But he didn't tell me later, but I think I read it in one of the, or maybe it was just that as I gained more insight into the culture that he lived within in New York, I started to realize who the characters were in the song, and then I said, oh, okay, these aren't girls we're singing about, these are, like drag queens and like that. So, but and this is in relevant to the fact that I have no idea what his intentions were in a lot of his writing. I know a lot of the history of, for example, New Age. I have no idea where Jesus came from, what that's about, except Lou has a sort of a dark sense of humor, and I think that may have something to do with it. But New Age is sort of a personal thing. It's and I didn't know about that until I read some of his biography, some of his history, and discovered what had happened to him before the band and who some certain people were and how important they were in his life, and then it made sense to me. And a lot of the, for example, in New Age, there's bits and pieces of the original song or the original lyric, and then they've been overlaid by a sort of it's like when you have a famous master's painting, and they do a painting over that, and if you scrape away the surface paint, you can get down to the original painting. Well, New Age is a lot like that, and there's a lot of smoke and mirrors over the top of what the song is really about, and I think there's still bits and pieces of the original in there. I know I sang, when I first sang it, there was more of it, and later on there was less of the original painting. But it's a very personal thing for him, or it was when he wrote it. It was an important person in his life, and when you write about something like that, it's hard to just lay it on the line. You tend to speak in terms that are easily confused because it makes it just easier to do. It's hard to be open and vulnerable. You get hurt that way. I think a lot of the what formed the sound was everyone, without exception, everyone in the group was to some extent very talented in at one or, in some area, and at the same time unschooled in general. So in other words, there was nobody in the band who was well, after John left, I should say, who was a classically trained, really a heavily classically trained musician. When he left, I was probably the most, and it wasn't enough to ruin my playing, but yet, it's something you see where someone has where their basic talent is exceptional, but it hasn't been developed in any direction. It might be a street tap dancer who's an incredible dance talent, but never did anything but street tap, just watching other people and picking it up themselves. Jean Carignan was a famous French-Canadian fiddle player who was virtually self-taught, and he lived on the streets and made his living on the streets from the time he was very young, playing the fiddle, and just a brilliant player, but totally unique because he had very little received training. It was more coming from the inside, and I think to a great extent what made the Velvets attractive or what made them unique was that you were dealing with stuff from the inside that was coming out as opposed to stuff that was taught. You know what I mean? The fact that they were less trained made their talents more unique because it came out in its own way. It wasn't formed into someone else's idea. You know what I mean?